I need to correct something that I might have said wrongly. I suggested that we heard that an animal that kills a person is disqualified from being a korban. This came up recently, and I had mentioned even if the animal killed in self-defense. The best example was the bull in the bullfight, which is a terrible thing. It's animal cruelty. It should be stopped. It's connected to avodah zarah. In some cultures, they still have bullfighting, and sometimes you read Baruch Hashem, the bull wins. Why do I say Baruch Hashem? Because they were hurting the bull. They were engaging in an avera with this bull and then trying to kill it in a cruel fashion. And the bull was just defending itself. So if the bull successfully defends itself and even something kills the matador, so he deserves it. Okay, and they let the bull go. But because that bull killed a person, that bull would be disqualified from actual proper sacrifice to God. But then we saw, no, it turns out in that case, if a bull killed in self-defense, then, for example, then the bull is still a legitimate korban. Okay, we're going to get to the halacha. So if I said that wrong before, I may or may not have said it out loud. I don't know if I was talking to you guys, but I wanted to make that clear, that a bull that kills in self-defense is still valid for a sacrifice. We're in the 9th parak. I'm going to put it on the screen for the benefit of those at home. Thank you. Yeah, we're in the 9th parak. We're at Harama Sadeshin, right? This is interesting. Remember, the Rambam started off with 3 types of blemishes. He mentions here in Biat Mikdash 3 types of blemishes: those that are in common, animal and beast alike; those that apply only to people; and those that apply to people be d'Rabbanan. Why the Rambam mentioned those 3? Because that's what we're going to be talking about through to the end of Biat Mikdash. But then we're going to go into Isurim Mizbeach, and the Rambam is going to give the missing category. Someone should ask, what about the category of that just disqualifies animals? He said, Mumim for animals and people, just people, and the Rabbanon on people. What about just animals? Yes, those are going to be in Yisurim Mizbeach. Why the Rambam broke it up this way? He had his reasons. I don't know exactly why. He could have said, also Biat Mikdash. I guess Biat Mikdash refers to people coming to the base of Mikdash. Yisurim Mizbeach is specifically things that are offered on Mizbeach. So that's why we're not done discussing the different blemishes that could affect animals that are supposed to be for sacrifice. So stay tuned. Let me put this on the screen. We're on Sefer Avodah, Biat Mikdash, near the end. Is there anything else that was unclear that we saw in previous times? No? Okay. Please tell me if you do not see what we have on the screen. Here's the halachas. What is Haramas Hadeshin? Sometimes it's called Trumas Hadeshin. Trumas and Haramas are from the same shoresh. Okay? Reish Vav Mem. It's a hifiel. And this is something that has to be done first thing in the morning. They remove ashes from the altar. And that was basically the pre-Shacharis service. If the burning the extra limbs and fats that remained from the previous day's service was the overtime service at the end of the day, so the Trumas Hadeshin is what they do before they even begin the service of the Talmud in the morning. Be'erimas Hadeshin. So he has to remove some of the ashes there. And it says about the Kohen that he has to wear V'lavasha Kohen midovad. He has to wear his uniform that mido, right, from the word madim. By the way, madim with a dot and the dalet is what you say. They say uniform for soldiers. So here it's mido vad. It means his proper, from the word size, mem dalet dalet. There's a dot and the dalet to make up for the missing dalet. It means the clothing has to fit him, and it has to be linen. So the Kohen puts on the linen clothing that fits him, because if it's too big, we saw also sometimes it can't even be. It's a psul, and you can't say that, well, we just saw before there are certain services that a non-Kohen can do. What was that? We concluded last week, 2 weeks ago, with what could a non-Kohen do, according to the Rambam? L'chachila, light the menorah. So you think Trumas Hadeshin, well, that's just taking away the ashes. The ashes have already been burnt, so the sacrificial service is over. No, even that requires a Kohen. V'im herim Yisrael lokeh. So if a regular, means an ordinary Jew, was the one who removed these ashes, did it perform the act of Trumas Hadeshin, so he is to be lashed. Ve'enu chayav mita, and he is not liable to death. Afal pi she'ein acharei avodah, even though there is no service afterwards. Remember, we said that why should he? Well, the service that's a service is the kind that final service. There's nothing done afterwards. So there's nothing to do with the ashes once they've removed and deposited. Go on. But this one is considered that type. Shnemar avodat matana. It's a service of giving a gift to God. And he explains here, avodat matana hu shetiyeh b'choin levado. If it's a service of giving to God, it has to be done only by a Kohen. V'im karav la'azar, and if let's say a non-Kohen, we said that's what azar means, came close to this, it means he did this service. Chayav mita. Aval avodat siluk. What's an avodat siluk? Like this kind. Ein chayvim alemita. That's not that. That's the kind that would not enjoin the penalty of death. So basically, the Rambam's calling this avodat siluk. Okay, not avodat matana. You don't give the truma sedeshin to God; you take it away from Him. Okay. Im dishen mizbeach hapnimi v'hamnorah. By the way, for those at home, I don't like the fact that Machon Mamre put a yud over here, dishen, and also here midovad over here. There shouldn't be yuds in these two words. You guys don't have yuds in the words because you have proper nikud. I do not believe Rambam wrote this with yud either, and I think that it would have been better for them. I don't know. Check the Kiss Biat. I think it would have been better for them to keep it to the way the Rambam himself wrote. Okay.
No, Makbili is
Yeah.
the spelling that the Rambam used with more modern nikud.
Yeah.
So they have Kriyat Shema written as Kiryat, but they Menaket it.
Okay. Fine. So, but the Rambam, you don't think he would have written yuds in this case, right? Yeah, it's a very modern thing to write yuds in PL verbs. Okay. The pain im dishem is beach hapnimi v'amra enochi amita. Also, removing the ashes from the inner altar. Don't forget, they put coals and incense on the inner altar. Eventually, they have to clean it up. But is cleaning the inner altar a service that's mentioned a few times? It's barely mentioned. It's not one of the things that, yes, clean the inner altar. Just assume that he has to remove eventually the remnants of it for the next act. Okay. Also, replacing the burnt out wicks of the menorah. That's what's referring to here. That is something that's a part of Hatavas Nevros, but there it's not Chayiv Misa. Sideret Maracha, once again, a stray yud over here. Tell you it's a PL. That's a modern Hebrew thing. Let's say he straightened out the wood. He's the one who arranged the wood on the altar. Poraka. So we should take it apart. The Chozera Kohen V'Sodera. So, and then let a real Kohen do it. If a Jew had arranged the wood on the altar, what he should do is take it apart, undo it, and let a Kohen put the wood in order. Why? Because if a Jew does arrange the wood on the altar, it is invalid. So you should let a Kohen do it. Okay, knock it away. Next. These three people. The person who's impure, whatever that means, many ways to become impure. Balmum, person with a blemish. A person who has not washed his hands and his feet properly, like we saw earlier. And all these who served in the temple, Einan Chayavim, they are not liable unless what? Ela avodot she'azar chayav alehen mita. They're only liable for any punishment if they did the services that a non-Kohen would be liable to death for, or for which he'd be liable to death. So find that category. If Azar did it, he'd get the death penalty, or he'd be liable to death. That's more accurate. It's not like Misas Bastin. So too, a Kohen who's has this type of disqualification. And for the other types of service, it's only a thou shalt not. Means no, no punishment. It's just a warning. Don't do this. And yeah. So I think it would be good if we made a nice chart over here. I wouldn't be able to show this on the screen. I was trying this on Shabbos, so I couldn't write this down. But I would want to make a chart like this. Do you guys have a chart in Makbili? Makbili make a chart of these things? Yeah? What is it? Well, yeah, show us the chart. Look at that. Oh, look at that. Hapsul, okay. Chayav Misa B'dei Shemayim L'chiv Malkus. And it has all these things. Okay, good. Well, maybe we should put this on the screen. Okay. Look at that. He made a chart. See? I was hoping for that chart. And that chart basically says everything we're going to say now. So you know what? We'll photograph it. Here, can you guys, someone take a picture of it? We'll put up on the screen when we finish this, so we could go through it. Next. Hatamei Valmum, oh, we said this. Kohen Tavul Yom. What is a Kohen Tavul Yom? He only went to mikveh today from an actual tuma. Every Kohen goes to the mikveh every day. Why? Just to put on Big Day Kahuna, they have to go to mikveh. But here, a Tavul Yom is a Kohen who had a specific impurity, even just simple keri. So he goes to the mikveh. He is a Tavul Yom until the stars come out, until it says, not sundown. And the Mechusar Kippurim, we saw that that's a Kohen who had to bring sacrifice in order to complete his purification. For example, he was a Mitzorah or whatever it was. Or Kohen who became impure, and now he's let's say he's not wearing his entire Kohen outfit, and he hasn't washed his hands and feet, and he served. So he's liable for each one of these things. He's a Tvul Yom, Nechusar Purim, and his Nitma, Nechusar Begadim, didn't wash his hands. It's a combination. He did one act, so he's liable on many fronts. V'imay Azar, and if he's a non-Kohen, Eno Lokeh Ela Achat Mishum Zarut. He's only lashed once. Why? He's a Zar. That's it. He's non-Kohen. Zar Sheshimesh B'Shabbos. Wow. He's doing the temple service. He's non-Kohen. But temple service involves malacha. Chayav mishum Shabbos. Okay? Mishum zaruth. So he's liable for violating the Shabbos and because he's a non-Kohen. So let's say he was the one, he ran in there, he disguised himself as a Kohen, and he was the one who put the limbs of the Musaf of Shabbos on the altar for burning. So he's liable for burning on Shabbos and also liable for serving as a non-Kohen. Let's say you have a Baal Mum, and he's also Tameh. Kohen should not serve on two counts. He's blemished and he's got impurity. He is liable because he is both impure and because he is blemished. Okay, very interesting halachot here. Kol Kohen, hold on, there was a Ravad here. You guys don't have the Ravad, right? Well, okay, he says here, this is something interesting. You guys heard of Isser Kolel? This comes up in Shgagos. There's a general prohibition and one that adds an Isser Mosif. Like, oh, now we could get hit twice for a chiyuv or something if he was b'shogeg, because this next level of prohibition adds something to the previous prohibition. We're going to see them in Shgagos, but the Ravid is mentioning this here. He says, Amar Avram, b'sosefta zizvachim, Kohen Shavad Tamei Tvul Yom Mechusar Begedim B'Shol B'Chutz Daim Raglaim Eino Chayav Ela Achaf. The Rambam said here that this case in Halacha Yud Aleph, he's Chayav Al Kol Achas VaAchas, and the Tosefta that's brought up by in Zvachim, that brought up by the Ravid, says Eino Chayav Ela Achas. He's only liable once. So what's going on here? The Efshar the Fliga Tanai Be'Isser Kol of Isser Bas Achas. It could be the Rambam's holding like a Mishnah, and this Tosefta reflects a different Tana. So, well, is he liable once, or is he liable for each and every what do you call it? I guess imperfection in the service over here. So what's the answer? The Ravid suggests, I guess it's an argument of Isser Kolo and Isser Bas Achas. Isser Basachas is the idea that, he does one Isser, or what he does one act, Basachas, but he's involved in many Isurim. Okay, so this is something we're going to get to. Isser Kolel, the idea of Isser Basachas. How do we start counting prohibitions? We say this prohibition didn't really add much to anything, or he's already doing something wrong, so it's not Kimli to be the Rabbi Mineh. That's regarding punishment, that you can't kill a person twice. Right? Or you can't give a person lashes if he's already going to be dying. That's something else. Those are two different, liabilities. We're talking about it for one act. So we're going to get into this now. It's chaval to have to do it now, but this is pointed out by the Ravid that it itself was a machlokas time, and Rambam basically held like, I guess, the Mishnah. Sefta disagrees. So make a note of that. I guess in a few weeks when we get to Shgagos, how are we going to get to Shgagos? Actually, it's in Korbanos, so that's the next book. But God willing, we'll get there, because there's a lot to say about that. Kol Kohen Shavad Avodah Zarah, Bein B'Mezid, Bein B'Shogeg. Any Kohen who served idols. What is Avodah Zarah? Bar-Hayim's, we were discussing this week, his own definition of avodah zarah. What is it? Some people think it's worshiping foreign gods. If you're worshiping a foreign god, that's avodah zarah. And if you're worshiping the one true God, so it's not avodah zarah. It might not be Judaism. The best example given is what many Rishonim, and I think even Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch said about Islam. For Muslims, Islam is not considered idolatry. Rambam says it clearly. Christianity, that's idolatry. But Islam is not idolatry. It's not Judaism. We're not advocating for people to adopt Islam. We disagree with a lot of what they say, but it's not idolatry. And the Rav pointed out that if you say avodah zarah means worship, literally worship that is strange, not what God wants, then even Islam is a form of avodah zarah. It's not idol worship. It's not avodat elilim or some other term, but it is a form of worship. We wouldn't go to our temple or synagogue and do Islamic ritual. So in that sense, it is strange. Okay, but in this case, what Maimonides means is a Kohen who served in a capacity as an adherent or worshiper of, well, I say idols, but even then it could just be some cult that it might not have idols, but it has gods that are not God, non-gods. Okay, it could be, let's say, I don't know, a form of Christianity that worships a Trinity, but has no graven images. Okay, not even crucifixes in their houses of worship, but that would still be avodah zarah. So a Kohen who did this, and by the way, not even necessarily doesn't mean he did the type of things that a Kohen does. He offered something on an altar. He poured a libation. He offered ketores. Or does it mean he just went to daven in church like everybody else? Okay, unclear. Okay, kol kohen shavad avodah zarah. Kohen who basically let's just say translate it normally. He worshipped idols. Bein b'mezid, bein b'shogeg, whether unwittingly or unintentionally. Afal pisha chazar b'tshuva gemura, even though he has repented completely. Okay. And by the way, this is awkward. The choser b'tshuva means go back, right? Teshuva means return. Literally it means return, and it means repentance. Tshuva is from the normal shoresh, like we saw. The Hebrew shoresh to return is shin vav vet. Lahashiv is to return something to its owner, and lashuv means to go back. And hoser, we said, was Aramaism, because in Aramaic it's the shoresh is hey dal and resh, and when you put that back into Hebrew, it becomes chet zayin resh, which is why the shoresh chet zayin resh in the Bible never means return. Whenever you have to return in the hifyul or the pa'al, it's always shin vav vet, and the shoresh chet zayin resh in the Torah is reserved for pigs. Really, okay. So here we mix the two. We say it should be shav b'tshuva. He returned in, okay, but he uses the rabbinic word for return, just like machazir shechina so l'tzion v'sechazena einenu b'shuvicha. Okay, shuvicha is the biblical word for return. Hamachazir shechina so l'tzion. Okay, hareze lo yeshamesh b'mikdash lolam. He should not serve in the temple ever. He's disqualified himself. Now, this is an important one. Is this a biblical prohibition? Is this a biblical disqualification? Where does this work? So when we saw who cannot eat Korban Pesach, even though we haven't learned Hilchot Korban Pesach straight, we started. Remember the first year we opened up Hilchot Korban Pesach. Who can't eat Korban Pesach? Kol ben nechar. It doesn't just mean a Gentile; it means a Jew who has become a meshumad. Okay, a Jew who worships idols, a renegade Jew. So that's explicit in the Torah. But where does it say that a Kohen, a son of Aaron, who worshipped idols, should no longer be serving in the temple? It's not a mum, it's not a physical blemish, right? So it says, no, it's alluded to in scripture, but in the Navi, like the Rambam says, Divrei Kabbalah, it says, Lo yigashu elai l'chahen li. They shall not lo yigashu elai l'chahen li. They should not approach me to officiate for me. Okay, and this is, I guess it's a reference to what Chazal created, a prohibition Chazal created. Okay, it's not, the Rambam's not going to give you a biblical source. By biblical, I mean Pentateuchal source for this idea. Okay, Echad hoved ota b'sherut. It doesn't matter if he served this idol or the strange god with sherut, which means, like, by the way, I said sacrificial type things, offering up on the altar, usual ones, menasech, mikater, mizabeach, tigon shenasa komer lavodah zara, as though he was an actual priest to idols. Doesn't mean he even became a priest. Oh, or he just bowed down to it. Oh, hamodeba v'kibla aleh ba'aloa, or he just worshipped it. What is it? Modeba means he acknowledges it as his God. He's a regular, like I said, he just went to church like everybody else, and I don't know, what do they do in church? They all stand up, pledge allegiance to the God. I don't know. The kibla alav be'aloa, or he accepted it as a God. Okay, modeba, he acknowledges it, he accepts it. Harezep pasul leolam. So he doesn't have to have done Kohanic things. Okay. Avarve, Kriv, let's say he actually offered sacrifice to a strange god. Ein korbano reach nicholach. So now if he brought korban to God, so in this case, hikriv means brought to God. He shouldn't have been a disqualified coin, brought to God. So his sacrifice is not reach nicholach. Reach nicholach is a straight biblical expression. What does it mean? What does reach nicholach mean? Literally means it's not a pleasant aroma. What does Unkelus say reach nicholach means? And how does Rashi explain it? Reach nicholach means received with favor. The first time we have this, Vayarach Hashem et reach nicholach. God smelled the good smell. That's talking about Noah's sacrifice after the flood. So Unkelus says there that God accepted his sacrifice. Or it says with Cain and Hevel, well, Cain lo sha'ah. Okay, so it means what? That he also there. God didn't accept the sacrifice, correct? So, and that's what it means here. Reach nicholach means not reach nicholach means it's unacceptable. It's a figurative expression, and Rashi says why? So why the reach nicholach? From the word nachas ruach. God gets nachas ruach from us doing as He commanded us. Right at the beginning of Vayikra, it says that. We have a question here. What about those who had worshipped in the Reform and Conservative religions? Or someone wrote deformed. So don't forget, the Rambam lived among those who he classified as Karaites and Sadducees. Based on, remember how the Rambam basically calls, pejoratively, he calls the Karaites of his day Sadducees, even though they're a different sect entirely. There are a lot of nafkaminos in practice. But for him, we have one thing in common. They're Jews who reject the Torah Shebaal Peh, and therefore the halacha, basically, the whole halachic approach. But he does not say that they're disqualified. Rambam could have said, by the way, and this includes Karaites and Sadducees, etc. But he never says things like that ever. Instead, in the Rambam's system, these types are what? They're just Jews who majorly need to repent. It's like Jews who engage in other averas. It's not avodah zarah. So it would be similar to Jews who were engaged in other averas because of whatever reason, taivas, lack of knowledge, etc. They're involved in eating non-kosher for a very long time. They're involved in Chil Shabbos for a very long time, and at the age of 60, they repent. So that's a good thing. I'll advise that they should all repent and return to God. But I don't think it would be a disqualification of this level. So at least within the Rambam, it could be wrong. I haven't seen much literature about this. It says here, Afal pisha haya shogeg be'et sheshiret o sheishtachava o shehoda. Even though this Kohen was shogeg when he went back to the temple, he didn't realize he had disqualified himself because once upon a time he had attended, I don't know, the Baha'i temple. Okay, they worship a foreign god, right? I don't know. I could imagine. They sound so creepy. They must be avodah zarah.
They worship the same God, but they say it's like Hinduism got replaced by Judaism, which got replaced by Christianity, and then Islam, and then
Well, who cares?
So forth.
I think it's working with the Rav's definition that any form of foreign worship, too much already. Let's say the Kohen himself, what disqualified the Kohen? He slaughtered to the avodah zarah b'shogeg. His act of worshiping the avodah zarah was itself a shigaga, and it was unwitting. Hold on one second. So what do you do in such a case? I think we just admitted someone. Okay, someone else came in here. Fine. What happened? So then if he goes back to the proper temple and serves, his sacrifice what? Reach nicholach, and then he explains to us what reach nicholach means. It is received with favor. God accepts it. Sharei lo shireit v'lo naseh komer. He did not serve an idol. He did not become an idolatrous priest. Ela shachat bilvad. He only slaughtered. He happened to have slaughtered the Hushogeg and was unwitting. What could this be like? I would imagine a person who attended. He was looking for a synagogue somewhere, and he went to synagogue, and he thought he was in the middle of nowhere, and they said it's like Chabad, but it turns out it was Jews for Jebus. So Jews for Jebus is Avodah Zarah, and he didn't realize. I thought at one time was they were trying to schlep me along to such a minion. It said it's Messianic Judaism. Okay, no, that's what a person called these other people. He didn't know how to do it, so it scared me for a second. But okay, it was just unwitting. The he shouldn't serve. Okay, it looks bad. People know that he did this. He has a name like those animals. We're going to see in the next chapter. Okay. Let's see. There's an Aruch HaShulchan here that says, "Shegam malachos shemutar azar la'asosim b'derech klal, aser lo la'asosim b'Shabbos, shlo hutra avoda b'mikdash b'Shabbos elach kohanim." You hear this? Interesting thing. Zar sheshimesh b'Shabbos. What do we say? A non-Kohen can slaughter any sacrifice, correct? As long as he knows how to slaughter properly, because the service of the Kohanim picks up when with the catching of the blood, and then putting the blood in the altar and all the ensuing avodas. What about on Shabbos? Can a Zar slaughter the Korban Tamid or the Musaf of Shabbos on Shabbos? So that's what the Aruch HaShulchan here seems to be saying. Why? Because when the Torah permits performing the temple service on Shabbos, it only permits the Kohanim to do so. Now that's a chiddush, because we're going to say whatever permits the temple service on Shabbos, it permits the temple service on Shabbos to whoever was supposed to be doing the service. And if a Zar is allowed to slaughter the Korban Tamid, so what's preventing a Zar from slaughtering the Korban Tamid even on Shabbos? Do they light the menorah on Shabbos? Does the Kohanim light the menorah on Shabbos? Yes. So apparently, if the Rambam holds a non-Kohen can have the privilege of lighting the menorah, if they, like we saw before Hanukkah, they removed the menorah from the temple and put it in the courtyard, so maybe you could even light it on Shabbos. And the Aruch HaShulchan would say no. Interesting idea. What about a mummer? What's a mumar? Let's say an atheist. An atheist isn't going to worship Avodah Zarah. He's just going to deny God. He's a kofar. Okay. He's basically become renegade Jew to the extent that he's not going to do Averos. He's not going to any religion. He's just given up everything. So what kind of person is that? He says the Tosfos say Shagam im chazar b'tshuva pasul avoda. According to the Chafetz Chaim, though, says here, if such a person repents, he would be a valid Kohen. Okay, interesting halacha there. We want to see once again. We'll see what the Sanhedrin says. What about Mechal Shabbos before Hesia? Mechal Shabbos before Hesia isn't, let's say, a person who's, like you said, conservative and reform in this case. He's basically a renegade. He grew up Orthodox, but he doesn't want to keep Shabbos anymore. He's just, most people who go reform conservative, it's that, I guess they're just weak in these things. They're looking for a justification. And it's not their fault, by the way, because they're allegedly, ostensibly rabbis. We're telling them, no, this is the perfectly legitimate form of worship. Hold on one second. We don't want to get disconnected, so I need you guys to connect this for me. Hold on. Very interesting. Here, plug that in with the black thing, black head. Okay. Yeah. So what does he say here? The pain mishenu mamin puzzle. Interesting. There are those who are mistapek in these cases. What if you just don't believe in God? Yeah, good question. Okay. They say he becomes basically a balmum. Once he's worshipped idols, now he's blemished himself. And some say, well, eno eladino kevalmum, but shecholik bekadshim lamos she'aser lo lavod avoda. He could still eat the kudshim, just like a balmum still gets pieces of sacrificial meat, even though he can't serve. So too, this Kohen could still eat the sacrificial meat. The Dasa Rambam Gamu Shtachavel Mekabala Le'aloa B'Shogeg Nifsal Le'olam La'avodas Psulo Gam B'Diavad Raka shochet b'shogeg. Okay, when the Rambam says here he was shochet b'shogeg, but if he worshipped b'shgaga, he did some other thing b'shgaga, he still disqualified himself forever. Interesting. Okay. Ladas orach hashulchan dinam ke'ashochet she'im avad avodaso k'shera b'diavad. Okay. Interesting. Like I said, there's all these questions. We'll wait to see. Remember, the Sanhedrin's main job is to determine which Kohanim can serve and which not. So this will have to be taken up right away. I'm sure there are a lot of Kohanim. Yeah, it's unfortunate. By the way, when is a Kohen judged for these things? At the age of 13. He's liable for his actions. So there are going to be a lot of Kohanim when they show up. They're going to ask him all sorts of questions. What have you done with yourself? And can you prove that you've been on the up and up? You don't want to have to have done anything like this. Kasva Tosfos. Okay, yeah, I've seen that before. There are some say, I think we mentioned this before. What disqualifies a Kohen? Remember, it says the Avera can disqualify a Kohen. We said that whole thing that it seems that a Kohen shouldn't duchen if he killed someone, correct? And then we saw, what about a Kohen who's married to a Grusha? And we saw that the Shulchan Aruch brings. There are Rishonim who said, yeah, we don't, Kohen's married to a Grusha, we don't let them duchen either. Even though that's not what the Rambam says, not what it seems what the Talmud says, it seems they're extending this. It says a Kohen is married to a Grusha, we make him divorce her and or swear to divorce her right away, and then we'll let him serve. So they extended that to the ordering the priestly blessing in the synagogue. So that was interesting why they extended that. So too, just like it says a Kohen who killed should not be blessing people, then they extend that and say, and he shouldn't be performing the temple service either, which is a stretch, right? It would mean that Yudah Maccabee couldn't even serve in the temple. And I don't think that we hold that way, by the way. That would disqualify even Pinchas from serving in the temple. But we know that Pinchas became Kohen Gadol. He probably didn't ever utter the priestly blessing because the straight halach is, that that's not ma'akev of Kohen from serving, but a Kohen who killed someone. Okay, I don't know. We'll have to see. I think that this is a weak Tosfos. I think certainly the Rambam doesn't agree with it. It's very strange to say that because this Kohen is disqualified from blessing the people, he should also be disqualified from performing the service. Chazal never said such a thing. They're very specific. Killing a person disqualifies a person from blessing. Marrying a Gerusha disqualifies a person from performing the service. And you don't extend either of those to the other. Okay. Okay. Which halach are we up to? Yudalid? This is a good thing. I have to thank now. Shout out to Rabbi Reuven Chaim Klein. You guys know who he is? Those watching at home might have heard him. He's a columnist for the Jewish Press. Also a prolific author. I use the word prolific sparingly, but it aptly describes Rabbi Klein, who lives in Beitar and has put out quite a few books and regularly puts out acts of major proper scholarship. And he's very on the ball with also his diktuk. So diktuk is the sign that someone knows what they're talking about, literally. Okay. So he sent me some sources about this. He was writing something in his forum blog a few years ago about this very issue that the Rambam brings up now. What is it? Mishe avar v'asa bayit chutz lamikdash. Okay, person did an avera. He created a temple outside of the actual temple. Okay, he made some sort of house of worship, not just a synagogue. Okay, why? La'akriv bo korbanot l'Hashem. If you build a gigantic temple-like structure somewhere outside of Jerusalem, let's say the great synagogue on King George Street, or any of those huge synagogues in Chutz La'aretz, that's not for sacrifice. That's just for prayer. So that's a good thing. But if you would actually just decide what basically distinguishes many synagogues from a temple, the fact is there's no sacrificial service there. But if you'd put an altar in a temple synagogue's courtyard, you'd suddenly have something that's a big no-no. Okay, so he did this. Eino kivet avodah zarah. So that's not exactly a temple of foreign worship, by the way, which means why? Very important. What Yeravam did is not necessarily avodah zarah. They point out even though there are golden calves there and Beit El and Dan, that was not dedicated to any god but God. So too, the other example that they give, what's the classic examples that Chazal mentioned in this case? Chazal say it specifically. The Rambam doesn't say it specifically because it doesn't need to. It's talking about the temple of Onias. What? The temple of Onias in Heliopolis, or as they say in Chazal, Beis Chonio in, how do you say Heliopolis in biblical Hebrew? On. It says Kohen On, Joseph's father-in-law. On was the old Hebraicized name for whatever that city in Egypt was, that eventually in the Greek era came to be known as Heliopolis. Okay, so that's where what it's described in quite a few history books. It's a little bit confusing in the Mishnah and the Gemara there in the Yerushalmi. Rambam seems to take sides with one of the versions in the Yerushalmi that he mentions in his no, not this Parashah Mishnayos to what is it? Which Masechta is it? Zvachim, I think it is. Okay, the Rambam brings the whole story there, and he basically describes this Jewish temple which was built in Heliopolis by one of the descendants of Shimon HaTzadik himself. And it's very difficult. There was a fight over who could be Kohen Gadol, why he founded this temple, but well-known piece of history, the Jews had a mock Jerusalem temple right in Egypt, where they performed similar service. And it was known that this is not a temple to any strange god. It's the God of Israel, and they do worship here, sacrificial service. And they dug up later, Chazal didn't mention this a lot, but this is something that is well attested also in the historical record, Jews who went to live in a place called Elephantini. What's Elephantini? Oh, that's the one you might have heard of.
I heard of that. I just forgot.
Elephantini is the Elephant Island, which is much more south in Egypt. It's basically an island in the middle of the wide part of the Nile River. It's called Elephant Island, even though there are no elephants there. But at certain times in Jewish history, there was a large Jewish population on the island, and they also had some form of sacrificial ritual going on there that was apparently not idolatrous. Okay, and I don't know, I forget already. I can ask Rabbi Klein. You could see his article about what eventually became of this Jewish sacrificial cult at Elephant Island, Elephantini, as they call it, and it's called that also in Arabic. Or you could see what happened to the temple at Heliopolis. The temple at Heliopolis was destroyed by the Romans around the same time they decided that they need to destroy the temple in Jerusalem. So they were destroyed around the same time. Yeah, around the same time. It was part of the same.
No, because there were Egyptian Jews serving with the Romans against.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. So yeah, it was definitely after. It was around the same time, like to put down the Jews, that they destroyed this temple. So that's when it met its end. So in Mishnaic times, this was a real issue that you had Kohanim who had served at either of these two places in Egypt, and also in First Temple times. There may not been, in Divrei Yom it says most of the Levim and the Kohanim, when Yerovam started this whole thing, they did not like what was going on and they left. But there might have been one or two who had been involved with Yerovam at the beginning, and then they realized the grave mistake they had made. Or, for example, the Jonathan Levite, he's not a Kohen, but it says that at Pesel Micha, which started off in Micha's house, was brought all the way up to Dan. Remember, Dan twice in Jewish history, Dan housed places of strange worship that were not the one that God commanded, but also not Avodah Zarah per se, because they didn't have another God besides God. And you had theoretically Kohanim who had been involved in this. And the question is, so now are they disqualified or not? Okay, and what's the din? So Kohen who served in such a temple should not serve in the Beis HaMikdash ever again. But doesn't say worshipped. If the Kohen came to daven there, he would not be disqualified. Only if he actually did acts of kahuna outside of the temple would he then be disqualified from serving in the true temple. Very important distinction. I showed someone, basically that's what Pesel Micha was. It was a shul like any other shul at the time. Remember, Jews always had places of worship outside of the Beis HaMikdash and outside the Mishkan. In the times of the Shoftim, where did they go to study Torah? Where did they keep their Torah scrolls? When Jews needed to pray and read the Torah, they went to a place designated for that. basically came to be called a Beit Moed or just a Moed, and later Beit Kanishta or Beit Knesset, nowadays shul or synagogue. Those things always existed in Jewish history. They're mentioned in even in passing in Tehillim. Okay, they're from before David HaMelech's time. If you had gone to Pesel Micha's area, you would have think it's just any other shul, and then you walked in there, and what do you've seen? It looks like just like this place looks like any other base medrash, right? What would you have noticed if you had been Pesel Micha? The only difference was that there was an idol about half the size of this bottle, made out of silver, sitting at the front, and that was it. There was nothing that made it look any different than any other synagogue in the world. But already that's a disqualification. By the way, how big was the golden calf? The golden calf that was made at the foot of Mount Sinai. How big was it? So we imagine, Charlton Heston type of thing. It was as big as a bowl, right? A gigantic. So one, we're talking about the image of a calf.
Yeah.
So it's already smaller than a full-size bull. Secondly, there wasn't that much gold donated to it. I think that where we showed the sources, from what we could best tell, the golden calf that was made, that Moses destroyed, was about this big. It wasn't a massive thing at all. It was small, didn't have that many adherents, and like I said, the Torah has a very exacting standard for how exemplary people are supposed to behave. The golden calf was not this massive idol that we think of. Remember, it was made overnight. Okay, it was a simple figurine. Okay, nothing major. Okay. The kelim shenishtamesh bahem sham. Okay, kelim that they used in, let's say, the temple of Onias. Lo yishtamshu bahem b'mikdash lolam. Ela yiganzu. They should not be used in the real temple ever. Instead, they should be put in Geniza. I have a note here. See the end of Maaseh Karbanos, where they talk about. By the way, that's where the Rambam brings shchitas chutz. What about sacrifice that have been offered outside of the temple? Wherever it is, once it's outside the temple, it's already considered shchitas chutz. Next, verily she'ima vad kohen shimei sham b'mikdash lo pasal. And if one of these kohanim who had served in the temple of Onias, who had served at Yerovam's temple, who had served in Elephantini, wherever it is, so if he comes back to the base of HaMikdash and serves, he is not disqualified anything. Why? Because he didn't worship anything that was a strange god. Good. So he points out something here. Rabbi Reuven Chaim Klein, like I said, he knows about the words, gave a good example this week of Latin in the Torah. Now, first person to say Latin in the Torah, but Latin wasn't around. Like Moshe Rabbi, you're mixing up your time periods. When we say Latin, we mean, let's say, Proto-Latin. The forerunners of the Romans were speaking their foreign languages. I don't mean vulgar Latin. I don't mean even ancient Latin of the negative 7th century Latin. I'm talking about the Proto-Latin. Just like, by the way, there's Proto-Hebrew. We dig up archaeological remnants of, let's say, a Hebrew that existed before Abraham's time, right? So I'm talking about that type of language. But either way, you can still see, well, but you don't call it Latin.
No, you can't call that. It's not even italic at that point. Like it's still like arguably Bronze Age.
Okay, but whatever it is, for lack of a better word, I don't know what you call it. Call it what you will. The point is, some of those words do occur in Tanakh. Just like Rashi points out, there are certain words that are Greek in the Pentateuch. What are the Greek examples Rashi gives? Mecherotehem, their swords, Shimon and Levi, Alon Bachuth. The Gemara points out pre-8 Hadar, okay? Hey Dalad Reish means growing on water. These are all explicit of Greek. The fact that Greece was already Greece before Abraham was born to a world that had Greeks. Okay, that's mentioned in Bereshit. Okay, so they weren't a major influence in Babylonia and Chaldea of Abraham's time. They were not a major influence in Canaan during the New Kingdom of Egyptian, the New Kingdom era of Egyptian dominance in Canaan. But Greeks did exist. People could get on a boat and go to Greece and maybe trade a little bit and come back. They knew what such things were. Yavanim existed. Okay. So it is not crazy that we find a little bit of Greek in the Torah. And I've given examples now also of earlier Latin-like things like Amor, etc., that occur in the Torah. that, for lack of a better explanation, that seems to be it. It says that the Egyptians called Joseph what?
Something like that.
No, before that. That was the title that Pharaoh gave Joseph eventually. Before that, a stage before that, he was called Vayikru Lefanav Avrech. And
Yeah.
what does it say there? What does Onkelos translate? Dain Abba Lamalka. This is the father of the king. It means he's the king's top guy. Okay, he's the one who guides the king. Dain Abba Lamalka. Now, Rashi and others point out how do you see that in Avrech? Because Avrech means father of the king. Reich is eventually what became the word in Latin for king. Okay, and it continues in all sorts of European languages. Now, that is not what Rabbi Klein has invented. He just pointed out that that's what Onkelos and Rashi say.
You could even
Yeah.
you could say that it's still Greek and
In Greek?
like arch.
Okay, okay, fine, it might be Greek. But the point is, this is yet another example where we find what, for lack of a better term, is Proto-Latin. Yeah, it's fair. Okay, good. So I knew people would like that. So we put this here. And so I took some notes here that there's some things we have to mention. Why would people have a justification for doing these things? You should know the Gemara there is talking about what? The Heter Bamos.
Mhm.
How you and I assume, like the Rambam, Lahalacha, once a temple is built, can't worship anywhere else sacrificially ever again. That wasn't exactly a unanimous opinion among our sages. There were some who maybe assumed that once the temple at Jerusalem had been destroyed the first time around, once again, sacrifice was permitted for Jews outside of Jerusalem, especially before the second Beis HaMikdash was built. And of course, if they held that sacrifice had been permitted during the temple destruction time, during the 70 years of Golus Bavel, it would have been hard to have stamped it out again once the temple was rebuilt. So you can understand why during Second Temple times, once again, there was a belief among Jews, especially in certain areas, that what they are doing by worshiping outside the temple is, by worship means sacrificial worship, is legitimate or recognized by halacha. Even if it wasn't, you can understand why. Also, like we've said, why it is that Yerovam had a very easy time convincing Jews worship outside of the Beis HaMikdash in first Beis HaMikdash times. Why? There had already been more than half a century of precedent that they do sacrifice wherever they want. There was a Heter Bamos, so why would Shlomo Melech change anything around? Especially if he had sinned and God had punished him. So you can understand why these things persisted, even if it was wrong. So the possible justification for this temple at Elephantini was that the Bamos were allowed once again with the destruction of the temple. The Chasam Sofer suggested this, that could have been their justification. And it's also forbidden to destroy altars that are dedicated to God, even if they were built once they were built for Heter. So where do we get this idea? That if an altar was built for Heter, even if you're not allowed to use that altar ever again because it's a bama, you're not allowed to destroy it. It's a part of an isser of lo sa'asukein lashem okechem. Excuse me. So where do we get this? Which Navi even said that it would be a sin to destroy an altar outside of the Beis HaMikdash, even if it's not in use currently? Who was it? Eliyahu Navi says it basically twice. What does it say about Eliyahu Navi? Eliyahu Navi offered sacrifice on a one-time basis. Horasha, where? Basically at Haifa, on Mount Carmel, right? So what does it say that he did? What did Eliyahu Navi? Did he build an altar there? What does it say that he did there? It says he built God's altar that had been destroyed. Heharus. God's altar was at Mount Carmel? No. Somehow there had been an altar built there by Heter. It was recognized as this is an altar to God, whether from the times of Yeshua or times of King David or King Saul, a proper Jewish altar that had been destroyed by renegade Jews. It had been destroyed as an act of, take that, God, even though it shouldn't have been used anyways. So Eliyahu Navi rebuilt that altar, and that's where he did his big Kiddush Hashem. So it says that's the altar Heharus. Secondly, Eliyahu Navi went then to Mount Sinai and basically argued for he was the prosecutor of the Jewish people there. He says that the Jewish people are up to no good. He would rather resign his position as Navi. He can't take the persecution. Why? They're killing the Nevi'im. They're doing other things. Here it says, Kano kineti l'Hashem Elokei tzavaot, ki azavu britecha b'nei Yisrael. The Jews have forsaken your covenant. With mizbechotecha, I can't talk. Harasu. What did they do? They destroyed your altars. Elanavi says this twice to God. They have destroyed your altars. He complains to God. He says, I'm the only one left. I have been, he says this again, Kano kinesi l'Hashem Elokei Yisrael et mizbechotecha harasu. Niviecha haragu becharev. They have killed your prophets. They have destroyed your altars. One, God doesn't have multiple altars. Doesn't he have just one altar in the base of HaMikdash at this time? Yet Elanavi is saying the Jews are destroying your altars. One, they haven't even destroyed the altar. So what altars is he referring to? It means Elanavi is accusing renegade Jews, Achav and his party and Izevel, of destroying altars that existed in Eretz Yisrael that had been built beheter and should have just remained as monuments. I'll give you two good examples. That which Yaakov Avinu built. Yaakov Avinu built altars where places like Bethel and where God revealed himself. Avraham Avinu built one near the Ai, and in Shechem, and in Hebron, and in Beersheba. These were all places where our ancestors worshipped properly. So you can imagine that these places were revered. And by the way, it could have been a very good argument made by Yerovamists that God perhaps wants the base of HaMikdash to be built at one of the Avos's altars. Hamash Malon, you're not allowed to do that, but you still have to treat these things with reverence. Because they were built by Nevi'im for the name of God, they maintain their Kedusha. To the extent that what's the Kedusha? You can't offer sacrifice there, but you're not allowed to destroy it. Who else had altars built to God? It says David. He built an altar to God, not on the Temple Mount. Samuel. The prophet Shmuel had altars built. Yishai, when Samuel went to visit Yishai to anoint one of his sons, what was the pretext? He needed a cover story to go there. So what did he do? Doing sacrifice. Go to the altar at Beis Lechem. So all these places, Yishai's altar, I can imagine, was considered a very holy place, but you couldn't destroy it. Holy, but you can't do anything about it. Just leave it in Geniza. And the problem was that it wasn't good enough for Achav and Izevel and their followers to, leave these places alone. They were actually destroying it. Nafkamid would also be, wait a minute. So I haven't seen the Rambam or anywhere else that these false temples in Elephantini and in Beis Chonyo in Heliopolis and in Dun and in Beit El that Yerovam built, what was the din? Did they have to be destroyed? What would you do with those altars? Kamash Malon, the Navi said, one day Yoshiyahu will destroy the altar in Beit El. One day the Navi will destroy that. Yoshiyahu will do that. Mashma, that all the other altars would not be destroyed. Once it's built to God, you have to let it stand. Okay. Next. There was apparently cannibal Jews also in Egypt. You heard about that? I didn't see that, but apparently there were. There was something that they were doing there. And also, according to the Rambam, it doesn't matter what they did in Egypt. There was some who say that there was someone arguing that there was a Avodah Zarah in Egypt. Okay, but it doesn't really matter to the Rambam as long as the Kohen is puzzle. Even if he worshipped God, no Avodah Zarah was involved. If Avodah Zarah was involved, definitely the Kohen's puzzle. Even if there's no Avodah Zarah, according to the way the Rambam has it, they're still disqualified. So let's finish this. I shouldn't be screaming. I don't know why I'm getting excited. Then I raise my voice, and then I hurt my voice because I shouldn't be doing that. But whatever. Let's see this last halacha. Nimtzu kop sulim lavodash monasar beluhain. Here's everybody disqualified from the avodah, specifically kohanim, non-animals. Choved avodah zarah, one who worshipped strange worship, the zar, that's non-Kohen. The Balmum, the born of blemish. The Aro, the one who is uncircumcised for whatever reason. The Tameh, the impure. The Tvul Yom, someone who went to mikveh but has not had the stars come out yet. He hasn't had the time approached. Michusar Kippurim, a person who has yet to bring sacrifice to complete his purification. The Onain, one who is basically experienced the death of a close relative but hasn't buried him yet. The one who is intoxicated, that's the Shikor. Michusar Begadim, the one who's not wearing proper Kohen outfit. Yeter Begadim, a person who's wearing too much garments. Parum Begadim, this means a person who is whose clothes are ripped. Parua Rosh, one with too long hair. It doesn't mean exposed head. Exposed head is Mitlusar Begadim. That means he's not wearing his Kohen hat. No, this means his hair is too long. Shelo Rechutz Yadayim V'Raglayim, one who has not washed his hands. Hayoshev, one who's sitting. Mi Sheyesh Bein Raglo Vein Haaretz Davar Chutzeitz, one who has some sort of intervention between his foot and the ground. In this case, it doesn't mean the ground, it means the floor of the temple. Mi Sheyesh Bein Yado Vein Akli Davar Chutzeitz, one who was saying intervening between his hand and the kli, like a glove or a napkin. Misha Avad Bismalo, one who serves with his left hand. That means he performs the action with his left hand. Kol Elu Psulin Lavodah. All these are disqualified service. Bima V'du Chilulu. And if they did serve, they have invalidated the service. Chutzbi Prua Rosh, except for the one with the long hair, Ukrua Begadim, or the one with the ripped clothes, Vashochit Lavodah Zarab Shagig, or one who had slaughtered to Avodah Zarah. Once again, he said specifically slaughtered to Avodah Zarah and B'Shogeg. Shimavdu Avodatang Shera. So, because if they serve, then their service is valid after the fact. And that brings us to the end of Biat Mikdash. So we should start Yisurim Mizbeach right now because we have time. Any questions about that? No. I think this is a phenomenal section of halachot that we should pray that we should have a test on this. You know what we should do? We should have a written test. Everybody likes a graded written test so that we know what we're doing on these things, and we should all be subjected to such a thing. That way we know we really got the material down, because that's the only way we really know it. Over here we have Yisurim Mizbeach. Wow. Let's look at the mitzvahs involved in it. Anybody want to see these things? There's 14 mitzvahs involved, 4 positive commandments, 10 negative commandments. So, and here's the list. Ready? Look at that. It's written here. Okay, no, I have 2 separate lists. Does the Machon Mamre match the Koran? I think it does. La'akriv kol korbanot timimim. All the sacrifices must be brought timimim. That means not blemished. The word tamim, and mum are very close. Tamim and mum. What's the shorish of the word mum? Mem vav mem. What's the shorish of the word tamim? Taf mem mem. Okay, close. Shelo lakdish bal mumam mizbeach. One should not even dedicate a blemished animal to the altar. Shelo yishchot, and also that he not slaughter such an animal for sacrifice. Shelo yisrog damo, that its blood not be thrown on the altar. Shelo yaktir chelbo, that he not put to smoke its forbidden fat. That is what's the main act of any sacrifice? It's the slaughtering and throwing the blood, but then you also have to put the fat on the altar. It has to be burned on the altar. So that's what's laktir chalbo. Shelo yakriv balmum over, that a person not bring a sacrifice that has a transient blemish. The sheep has something that's going to go away. The blemish will go away. No, it shouldn't do it. Shelo yakriv balmum afilu b'korbanot aglim. Not to bring any korban that's a balmum, even if it belongs to the goyim. What does that even mean? Why? Because Gentiles, if they wanted to sacrifice to God outside of the temple, which they're allowed to do, Jews can't build an altar somewhere else in the world and sacrifice to God, but Gentiles may. We're going to see. So, the Gentiles have to have the exact standards as Jewish sacrifice? The answer is no. But there is some standard, just a lot lower standard. As a matter of fact, one of the things I want to look at, God willing, if other people can enlighten me about this one, do Gentiles, are they even limited to the 5 species of animal to which Jews are limited? Remember, it's a Mosaic law that only 5 animals are kosher for sacrifice. Technically speaking, would God accept from a Gentile a pig? You and I know from Hanukkah, pig is the worst thing a Jew could sacrifice. Like, obviously, it's not even kosher, but it's like the worst thing. Like, sacrifice dogs and pigs. It's just it's a chil Hashem just thinking about such a thing. But what about a Gentile? That's what he has. Noach. So what do we learn from Noach? Even Noahides had a standard of clean animals and unclean animals. The 7 types. So he goes, Noah should have realized. It says he took of all the clean animals. But when it means clean animals, normally when we say Torah in, let's say in the Torah, it means what we call animals that are kosher. So that's a lot more inclusive than the 5 animals that are kosher for sacrifice. There's only 5 animals kosher for sacrifice. All happen to be what? Either behemoths or ophos. 2 ophos, 3 behemoths. But an animal that's tahora even includes some wild animals. Okay, so perhaps it has to be a tahora at least. Okay, well, I haven't seen anything, but then again, there's a lot I haven't seen. But it then says about sacrifice to God that at least Noahides have to have a standard of perfection. What is that? They can't be missing an avar, just like Noach himself. He shouldn't have been a balmum. So the animals they sacrificed could not be missing, limbs. Okay, but all these little things like cuts and stuff, that's a Jewish standard that the Torah prescribes for Jews. So the point here is that when we bring Gentile sacrifice to the temple, it has to be held up to Jewish standards of mumness. And by the way, when did this whole thing become an issue? The whole Kamsa Bar Kamsa story. Remember, Rav Zachariah ben Avkulus, they said basically Bar Kamsa, who was a real no good guy, basically had it in for the Jews. So he made Nero's sacrifice have a slight blemish that for Gentile standards, it's like, what? It's not a blemish. Even the Jewish sages said, I want to sacrifice to the God of Israel in Rome. This is a kosher sacrifice. But now it comes to your temple. You're telling me it's not kosher? And the answer is yes. So they had a whole big discussion in the temple. Do we allow this sacrifice just this once to save our skins? Or do we stay to our principles? And that Tana won the day. And then the later Tanaim who lived after the Churban said, yeah, we really should have allowed it just to save the temple. Big mistake. We were too machmir and it costed us. Next. Shelo yatil mum bekadshim. Person cannot cause apply a blemish to the kachim. Why would a person do such a thing? Blemish an animal that's already dedicated to God. He might have his financial considerations. He thinks that, I'll recoup the loss. I really shouldn't have donated this animal I shouldn't have dedicated it as a sacrifice. I need to eat it. So I will cause it to have a blemish, and then it can't be a sacrifice anymore. Then I'll be able to redeem it at a lower price, and I get my money back. I'll recoup something, whatever it may be.
I think there's like one of them.
What?
Right, on Yom Kippur, one of them gets livestock, so they get the other 10, and the original one they just wait out till it gets a name.
Okay, but that's waiting out.
Yeah.
Okay, that is a halachic mechanism. Here it means giving it a moon. Okay, lifdot psulei hamuktashim. There's a mitzvah to redeem the disqualified sacrifices. There is a way to do this. We're going to see this. Give money, and then sometimes it even becomes completely chulin, sometimes not. We'll see. La'akriv miyom hashmini v'hala, explicit Torah prohibition, or I guess this isn't even prohibition. This is not saying it becomes a sacrifice or worthy from sacrifice from the 8th day and on. And by the way, 8th day, it doesn't matter what time of day was born. The 8th day, just like a bris, against the Pri Megadim, who said everything is calculated me'es leis, means 7 times 24 hours after birth. You have to know when this animal is born. Add 7 times 24 hours, and you have to wait. Only at that hour does it become roya for sacrifice, fit for sacrifice. But the other achronim say, what are you talking about? Just like child born anytime on Tuesdays, then circumcised on Tuesday. We don't look at this child and say, well, he was born Tuesday afternoon, so the bris will have to wait Tuesday afternoon, right? So that's what it means here. Shalolak riv et nanu mechir. We shouldn't bring to the temple funds brought as the hire of a harlot or the sale of a dog. Okay, money gotten from selling these things. You could sell dogs. Dogs are commodities. David Amel had dogs. Certain people need dogs. but the money gained there, and that's legitimate business. Esnan zona is never legitimate, but that's the reason why, let's say, a woman in this profession might feel that she has to donate this money to the temple. It allays her guilt for what she did. Shelo laktir seor udvash, to not offer on the altar any leaven or honey. What does honey mean in this case? You see, honey means fruits, types of fruit. Okay, sweet fruit. Limloach kol korbanot, to salt all the sacrifices. Lo tashbit melach brit Elohecha. Shelo lashbit melach me'al korbanot, and to not deny or to prevent the salt getting on all of the korbanot. So there's a commandment to salt everything and a negative commandment to not salt everything. And God willing, next week we'll get into Surah Mizbeach, and we'll close it from there unless we have more questions coming in. No? Questions in writing or oral questions? No? Okay, so have a good night, and we'll see you next week. Shabbat Shalom. Well, oh, wait, I got one thing.
I saw something, I think, in the first Kumar,
Yeah.
where they say that, the pasuk that says no funds from a Shazonah or Kelev.
Yeah, they another shot in what Kelef means, a male prostitute. Yeah. So that might have been shot there, but whatever. Chazal assume it means literally from selling dogs. Okay. Yeah. I saw Rav Hirsch also, I think, said that. Yeah, it's not just Sansino says that in context. Either way, have a good night.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.